Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shamet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School, Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, somewhere in New York City on sabbatical. It's great to see you guys. And we also have a guest,
Shachar the dog.
Torah Pooch. Okay, Vayakhel, this, we would be remiss if we didn't say this was an amazing parsha. Only for the first word, Vayakhel. Vayakhel means to congregate. I want to propose an idea, which is that we know that this parsha is taking place after all of the events at Sinai. So after the events at Sinai, Moses went up, the people worshiped the golden calf, Moses came down, shattered the tablets, Moses goes up again, and as we saw at the end of last week, Moses comes down and he is glowing. He is literally
He's on fire.
He's on fire. He's totally on fire, in a kind of metaphorical way, but he's glowing. He is in a way the representation of the burning bush. That is, he's not being consumed by the fire of God. And it's at this point that we know the Torah gives us a bit of a gear shift here. And it says, Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael. And so Moses gathers the people of Israel. And I want you to define Vayakhel and maybe go into different examples of that. And also, I want to ask how it fits in the context here. So Barry, go ahead.
So Rashi makes the point, a grammatical point, that it's a hiphil verb, which we often identify with causation. So Moses, by speech, gathers the people, rather than the kal, the simple action, which would be to gather with his hands. Now, you have to imagine if you have 600,000 fighting men, that it would be pretty hard to gather them physically. It would be much easier to use your voice. But I think the point that Rashi is making is that the gathering serves in some kind of an additional purpose. And it provides a counterpoint to the gathering that took place the last time this verb appeared, which was in the golden calf episode, where it's in the passive, Vayikahel. And it suggests that when they gathered for the golden calf, that it was not exactly a gathering, but more like an amassing, that it was helter-skelter, it was without causation. But here it is with intention and direction in order to hear the word of God clearly so that the people know what to do and will subsequently do it at the appropriate time.
So in other words, like the golden calf is a mob, basically. It's a
unruly mob.
An unruly mob, and as we all know,
January 6th of the Bible.
the mob has its
expressing legitimate political discourse.
Okay, fine. The mob has its own character, and it can go out of hand. It really went berserk. Okay, so Jeremy, talk to the content of what Moses is trying to convey to the congregation here. What are they? What is it? What's his content here? What's his message?
Well, the first thing that we're going to say is the very first words, even though this is in a long section of material that is about the construction of the Mishkan. It's taken up the better part of 5 parshiot, massive, seemingly disproportionate quantity. The first thing is talking about Shabbat, and Moses says to the community. Let me just open up my book here.
These are the
things. 6 days work shall be done. And the 7th day should be holy to you. Shabbat Shabbaton Ladunai, a holy day of rest to the Lord. And interestingly, it's both Yelachem Kodesh, it's holy for you, and it's Shabbat Shabbaton Ladunai, and holy to the Lord, which I think is a fabulous explanation of the experience of Shabbat. It is partly an act of worship, and it's partly an act of human enjoyment. It's a feast and a celebration. Kol haoseh bo melacha yumat, any violator shall be put to death.
Well, I need to talk about malacha. Malacha is the technical term that we find in Breshit, and when God creates the world, Vayichal Elohim mikol melachto. He ceases all his melacha, and here we're going to be in a whole chapter of melacha, of the creative work that's done. Go ahead.
This paragraph concludes with one specific instance of melacha. Lo tiva'aru eish b'chol moshvotechem b'yom HaShabbat. You shall burn no fire in all your inhabitants on the Sabbath day. The Mishnah in Tractate Chagiga says that the Shabbat laws are keharim tluyim b'se'ara, mountains hanging by a hair, because there's halacha merubah, there's lots and lots of rules, mikra mu'at, and a very small amount of biblical text. So there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of rules about Shabbat. The Bible doesn't give a whole lot of them specifically. Jeremiah talks about the prohibition of carrying in and out of the city of Jerusalem, but this example of burn no fire in all your habitations on the Sabbath day is probably the most prominent example. And like the people got the commandments about Shabbat when they got manna back in Exodus chapter 16 or 17. And the key thing about manna is you can't gather it on Shabbat. 6 days is out there, the seventh day is just not out there. I think that the prohibition on burning fire is associated with that. It's about food preparation. Get ready for Shabbat, get ready for it, work on Friday, prepare your feast, but then on Shabbat, do nothing.
Well, what is it about fire, and why? I mean, this it's a challenging question. Why this commandment, this prohibition is singled out here? I mean, we have tractates and codes that are organized around what you can and cannot do, and we can go into all the minutiae of it. But here it's like fire, no fire.
Well, we didn't start the fire.
We didn't.
So you could say there's yesh me'ayin and eish me'ayin as well.
Okay.
But what I'd like to suggest is the importance of fire here, I think, goes to a poetic image. I'm reminded of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel's great comment that Shabbat is a tabernacle in time. So we have the tabernacle on one hand, which is sacred space, and we have Shabbat on the other hand, which is sacred time. And the nexus is fire. We identify fire, especially in the Torah, with the altar. The sacrifices, almost all of them, have to be burned on the altar. And the commandment here is not to take the fire of the altar into your home. That sacred space must remain sacred space. And if you're not there, you cannot be part of it. But you can be part of sacred time wherever you are, because that's how time operates. And so the command here is to respect the sacred space by joining, as it were, the sacred time wherever you happen to be.
So I think that the fire commandment, to me, is really resonant about the mitzvah of no food preparation on Shabbat, and I think that that's one of the principal ways in which I personally, but I think us generally classically have experienced this, is that Shabbat involves preparation and then enjoyment. Like, you got to work. Misha toreach be'erev Shabbos yochal b'Shabbat, says the Talmud. Like, only those who labor on the eve of Shabbat will get to enjoy Shabbat, and I think that that's empirically true. You'll get more out of it, but I also think that we have to imagine, first of all, that it was laborious to produce fire, and so part of the commandment not to burn fire is to avoid the laboriousness. Also, I think fire, especially in an ancient context, would have been all about transforming something from state A to state B, and you turn potential energy into heat energy, you turn raw food into cooked food. You're gonna have to use fire to produce any number of other human artifacts. The rabbis, by the way, look at this first paragraph in the Parsha, which then proceeds into all of the other kind of executions of the Mishkan, is to tell you that Shabbat, as a paradigm of Judaism, supersedes the creation of the tabernacle. Right? It's brought out first before all the execution of the tabernacle stuff, to tell you before the execution of all the Mishkan stuff, to tell you that building the Mishkan is very important, but it's not more important than Shabbat. Shabbat supersedes. Don't burn your fire to make your dyes, to make the metal, to do all of that stuff on Shabbat. Shabbat comes first. So I think that the claim that you're not going to build the Mishkan, but you are also not going to do any other of the transformations that suggest human mastery over the raw materials of the world, that to me is part of what's going on here too.
So I want to go and imagine a different interpretation, which is that I pick up on something you said, Jeremy, which is that we don't live around open fire pits. We don't live around the hearth, we make we have artificial fireplaces in our homes. The closest that we get in our own settings is maybe a gas stove and maybe an oven, but people really depended on fire, and we can't underestimate the value of having a controlled fire in your home. And not only that, but way deep in the deep evolutionary past of human evolution, fire obviously was essential. There are evolutionary biologists who say that it is the discovery and the use of fire that is what made us human, that contributed to our being human, and that being able to control fire, being able to ignite fire, is the ultimate in terms of human creativity and the ultimate in human potential of destruction. And so not being able to do that and to restrict you from interacting with fire means the most potent element of creation and destruction is no longer accessible to us. And the way we do use it on Shabbat is, well, if it's set before, if we don't manipulate it, we can have a burner on, provided that it's controlled. We can keep the oven on, provided that we don't, turn it up and down the knobs or whatever. And those of us who practice our Shabbat without using electricity, and that's a whole debate as to what constitutes electricity. Is electricity really fire? And that became a really important halachic debate. But it kind of resonates with the idea that we are doing something, and that something can be completely destructive, cause tremendous destruction and danger and terror, and that can be the source of great human creativity, as you mentioned. Okay.
There's one more big element here, which I would suggest that anyone who's listening or watching our conversation has certainly done any number of times in their life, and that is the lighting of Shabbat candles. The Torah says, "Lo tiva'aru eish b'chol moshavotechem b'yom Shabbat." Burn no fire in all your habitations on the Sabbath day. I'm not familiar with Karaite writings. Karaites were a non-rabbinic Jewish path, and they still exist in Israel, and they were in the Middle East, and even some into Lithuania. The Karaite tradition interpreted that to mean you can have no fire burning in your homes on the Sabbath day, and so they did not, have any candles or anything else. And if they lived in the north, they froze. Whereas the rabbis interpreted to mean lo tivaru esh b'chol moshavotechem means don't ignite the fire, but you can let it continue to burn. And so our practice of Shabbat candles is actually a polemic going back to Mishnaic times, that there were two interpretations of this verse, and some of the ancient Jews considered it to mean you can have no fire burning in your house, and some of those ancient Jews, the people that we have come to follow, the rabbis, said no, it means ignite no fire de novo, but you can ignite it just before Shabbat. In fact, not just you can ignite it, you have to ignite it just before Shabbat to bring some light and some beauty into your homes on Shabbat.
So early on, it was more for practical purposes than aesthetic purposes. Of course, Shabbat candles have evolved in our own homes to fill an aesthetic and spiritual purpose. It's beauty, as you said. Okay, so
Well, I wanted to add something here. So Elliot, when you were talking, you were emphasizing how fire is so intimately connected with what makes us human. And I think what the commandment is trying to suggest, and I was thinking about this, you mentioned the creation of the world. The creation of the world, which is done by God, obviously, there's no mention of fire.
there's no mention of fire, right?
In either the first story in chapter 1 or the continuation in chapter 2, the first suggestion of fire is the sacrifice that Cain and Abel are going to make. And I think that perhaps the commandment not to light a fire, not to transfer a flame in connection with Shabbat, is not to make us less human, but to remind us that fire, in a religious sense, ultimately comes from God. And we are trying to be godlike on Shabbat, perhaps more so than during the rest of the week. And that's why we refrain from fire. And that's why it has that single importance, which we don't associate with any of the other malachot for Shabbat, which are clearly human activities.
Well, interesting that all ancient mythologies have some kind of story about the origins of fire. And so the fact that we would detach from fire also has a kind of anti-pagan purpose to it as well. Okay, so the Parsha deals with the construction of the Mishkan. We get the gathering of the all of the raw materials, which is quite a lengthy catalog. And then we meet again this extremely extraordinary personality, Bitzalel. Re'u kara Adonai b'shem Bitzalel ben Uri ben Hur l'matei Yehuda. See, Moses says, almost reiterating what God has said to him early on, chapter 31. God has called by name Bitzalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. Vayimale oto ruach Elohim. He fills him up with the Spirit of God. This guy Bitzalel I'm saying he's a genius. There's a genius quality to him. He has the Ruach Elohim, which is an echo again to creation. B'chokhmah, b'tfuna, v'dat, lachshov machshavot. He knows, he has wisdom and understanding and knowledge. It's all in the area of craft and the hand and the ability to use and to create things. I maintain that Bitzalel, this name, it's an echo, it's a bit of a pun. He is B'Tselem Elohim. It's not B'Tzel El, the shadow of God. It's the image of God. This is a guy who has so much talent, so much raw ability. And it's like, there are people like that who just once a generation or once every, I don't know how many generations, they populate our world and they're able to create, they're able to fashion things simply out of the sheer power of their genius. Do you want to, reflect on, I mean, B'Tzalel to us is the name, of course, is associated with all sorts of creative enterprises, but the idea of creating things of beauty to worship, we've talked about it in the past a little bit as well. And how that requires a certain endowment,
It does, and we don't have in Jewish tradition, for any number of reasons, it's not zero, but we don't have a great architectural tradition. There's the Duomo in Florence and the
St. Peter's Basilica,
St. Peter's, or even the Kipput HaSela, the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, or any of the other those cultures, Muslim culture, Christian culture, Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, they had a lot of wealth, stability, and they stayed there. And Jews moved around a lot, and we didn't build buildings this way. When I was in Poland, perhaps some of you have been to the Poland Museum in Warsaw, the hundreds of years of Jewish Poland. There's a reproduction of a synagogue. The synagogue was, of course, destroyed by the Nazis, but they had a very, very full photographic record, and they rebuilt this gorgeous dome of a Polish synagogue. But we don't have zero, but we don't have a lot of a great architectural tradition. Our artistry is mostly words. Our greatest artists have mostly been poets and writers, and we love that, and we should love that. But Bezalel is a call to me, like into the paths not taken of, who would have been our Michelangelos. Like you said, this is a rare genius. He's portrayed in the Torah as having this rare kind of special. Like Michelangelo could do this stuff, and Leonardo could do this stuff. He could work in multiple media and just make the world a beautiful place of stained glass, perhaps, or the jewels and the metals and the fabrics, and so I really I find myself very moved to think that we have a tradition not taken of building beautiful buildings. In the Gemara in Tractate Brachot, they associate Bezalel, like I said, Jewish tradition, our artistry is mostly words, and we have in Jewish mystical, in the Kabbalah and other mystical teachings, that the world was created by words, right? And so in the Gemara in Tractate Brachot, it says, Bezalel knew how to combine the letters by which heaven and earth were created. So his creation of the Mishkan was like a parallel to make the letter combinations to make this building come alive in the way that God made the whole cosmos come alive.
It's so interesting. It's such a dynamic within Judaism. I'm thinking about, Chaim Potok, My Name is Asher Lev, which is really one of the great Jewish novels, of the last century. And Chaim Potok, also most underrated Jewish writer, I think. Okay. Whoa.
Whoa. So we have to start all up.
We're going back to Chaim Potok, okay? And this tension in Judaism of art and the artistic spirit, and that it, Jeremy, when you were talking about this, I was thinking, like, if we have people who are watching us or listening to us who are artists, who are people who are engaged in calligraphy or in and they think in a different way. Artists, of course, look at the world and they see things that are much different than most of us who just involve ourselves with words. They're alienated. Well, I mean, I'm looking at my screen here, so I have things of art in the back. These are Jewish pieces of art, but that's the exception. No, I mean, they don't have a place with us.
It is, and it's funny because Islam, medieval Islam had this like incredibly intense prohibition on representational art. And there's a story in like Muslim Agadah that I read the story one time in a book about Islam that one of Muhammad's wives gives him this pillow in which she has embroidered a picture of a deer on it. And he was not a very gracious recipient of this gift. And he yells at her and says, what, can you make the deer come alive? No, we don't make representation. Only God makes representation. So you have this wonderful, tradition of all the non-representational Islamic art, but obviously it doesn't stay forever because they do make representational art and it's gorgeous. We also have, of course, the prohibitions on graven images, and we weren't as intense or mahmir about it, strict about it as the Muslims, but we never really got great at it until the modern era. And you obviously have Modigliani and Chagall and people who are great modern artists who are Jewish, but we don't have that Catholic tradition or that Muslim tradition, and it's a loss.
And look, that's what Potok was dealing with in that book, which was, what's my vocabulary? And that's why he has Asher Lev paint crucifixes, and to the reader, it's stunning. It's absolutely, it's such a great evocation of the conflict that here he has no vocabulary. There's no visual vocabulary to express these things.
So, Elliot, we have to come back to your comment about B'Tselem Elohim, which is the image of God.
Yes.
We don't believe that God has an image.
Yes.
So if God has no image, how can we have representational art? If we are striving to be like God, who has no image, then we cannot find
No, this is easy. It's easy. He's a
So
creator.
what I want to
Yeah.
suggest, though, is that it's related to B'Tselel El, because a shadow also has no image. And there's a
Okay.
tension between B'Tselem Elohim and B'Tselel El. I had a teacher many years ago when I was a student at Spertus College of Judaica, who said that for the rabbis, anthropomorphism, for many of them, was not really a problem. Because after all, we see the world as human beings. So even God, we imagine with human attributes. The problem was not with seeing God as a human, it was with people seeing themselves as God. And when you were talking earlier about Bezalel, the word that came to mind for me was charisma, which originally was a person who was touched by God or the gods. That was the original charismatic. And Bezalel is filled with this Ruach Elohim because certain creative forces we identify with God. We do not see them as solely the province of a human being. That the great story of the Bible for us, I think, is creation, perhaps, and Exodus second. That it is the creative act of God that we're trying to emulate, not necessarily the redemptive act of the Exodus. And that creative force cannot be as solely a human element.
So I want to just differ with you only in the sense that that's exactly what makes Bitzalel the image of God, because he's a creative force. I think that's what you were saying, and it's precisely because he's not a charismatic figure. He says nothing in the text. There's nothing that he's only a doer. Vayas, vayas, vayas. He is the one who's always doing. But there is one little hint that he has some other aspect of social genius, in that he's the organizer. He knows how to do this. He knows how to deputize people. He has.
Well, the question is whether he knows how to do it or God allows him to do it. And I think there's a difference.
So you're right. So it's the ability to direct is what God has given in his heart. Verse 34, right? Done. The guy who never gets the first billing in the whole, it's like produced by Bezalel, associate producer, Oholiav ben Achisamach,
Because
On that,
Bezalel here, in a sense, for as the role of God, and the Holy of is the role of Adam.
well, maybe it's like Moses and Aaron. You'll be to him Elohim, and he will be your mouth. Maybe Bezalel is the producer, and Oholiab is the associate producer. But I want to say one midrash about those two guys. Bezalel ben Uri ben Hur Mate Yehuda. So he's number one. He's from the tribe of Judah. Judah is going to be the tribe of King David. It's where the kingship is going to come. And Bezalel ben Uri ben Hur. Hur is not explicit in the Bible, but is again midrashically speaking. Hur is Miriam's son, so he's Miriam's great grandson, according to that thing, and part of the tribe of Yehuda. In contrast, Dan is the child of, I forget, Zilpah or Bilhah, one of the handmaidens. It's like the last tribe. The Midrash says that they took society's most prominent in the form of Bezalel and the least prominent tribe in the form of Oholiab, and brought them together to do the work together, which I find just a very enchanting little midrash, because
Right, but
yeah,
we have to remember that Dan, I think, is the second largest tribe after Yehuda. So we have
quantitatively,
what?
Quantitatively in the number of people.
Yeah, I think they have 62,000 in one of the censuses, and Judah has 74,000.
I confess to knowledge.
So they
into
take
the numbers.
one, so these are the two heavyweights.
The midrash that I'm going for has most prominent and least prominent. So whatever.
Yeah, it's also north and south too, and that the south.
Yeah, north and south. Yeah.
Sorry, the north has a subordinate role to the Judean. That obviously makes sense. Speaking as a proud Judean, of course.
Or is you from the Great White North up there?
I think so. All right. So let's just do one more footnote here, or one note, which is, so the people start bringing their stuff. They bring in lots of things. Vayomru el Moshe lemor marbim am lavi. They're bringing so much stuff. Lavi midei ha'avodah lamlacha. They're bringing so much stuff, so much raw material. And then Moses says, the Vayaviru koba machane lemor, send out the notice to the people in the camp, ish v'isha al yasu od melacha litrumata kodesh. Man, woman, do not do any more work to raise money, raise anything for the fashioning of the sanctuary. So we should all have this problem, right? But Jeremy, you just had the experience of fundraising, and I spoke about this in Shul a couple of weeks ago related to other matters, but the idea of giving, it takes on its own life. When it gets going, it's great.
Yeah, it's one can only sort of laugh and realize that Moshe Rabbeinu would have lost his job in the development department of any Jewish organization if he said, well, we've raised enough money, we can stop now. It's like, no chance of that. Who ever heard of such a thing? Haven't you ever heard of a rainy day fund? Come on, man.
Oh, really? The endowment.
Capital reserve. You got to never, it's an endless fundraising. But first of all, I think one could be a little homiletical and say that in this religion, we do have centers, public places of, public holy spaces, public places of worship. And by the way, the homes are also holy places of worship. They're just private. So at a certain point, maybe Moses is managing the proportions of, we've got enough for the public spaces. Now all of y'all in your own families have to devote to maintaining your private spaces. We don't want to bankrupt you. We want you to be able to have Shabbos dinner and send your kids to Jewish day school and send your kids to camp. And you got to do all those things too.
It's a great sermon. So
to add, just to add one point.
I'll just add one thing, which is that the what I think is a challenging thing for me to understand. Just after a big fundraising campaign at Anshe Chesed, back in Truma and here in the Parsha talks about the motivations and the people who are Kol Asher Yidvenu Libo and Nediv Lev, and the people who are generous and the people whose heart moved them. I'm a little anxious about the sense that we want gifts from people who give the gifts in the right reasons and not the wrong reasons. This is I can see how it can get nasty if the public people are saying, I only want the gifts if you're on the page with me and not for your own reasons. I don't know, that they could be complicated.
I want to get to that in a second, but let Barry go.
So what I find so fascinating is that the language of this Parsha echoes the language of the golden calf. And I think that when they brought their jewelry for the golden calf, they had a goal in mind. And Aaron, threw everything into the fire, and behold, the calf walked out, presumably. And here they understand that the last time they did something like this, they sinned grievously. So they're going to be told to stop because they know that they're not the ones directing this.
Yeah.
And so that's why they give until they're told to stop, I think.
I think, back to Jeremy, there's something that takes hold in people, and look, obviously generosity is a great thing, but when there's momentum to it, it becomes a force. It's almost an unbridled force, and sometimes the responsible thing is to say, whoa, you need to stop, because otherwise you're going to break. Because people, when this element of their lives is unleashed and unfettered, it can be, I don't want to say it can be destructive, but it can go in lots of different directions. I'm just, I mentioned this in Shul a couple of weeks. I'm stunned by the fact that there are these live YouTubers, and that people, they have a super chat. They press a button and, send $10, $20. And I'm watching a video, and like, people are just like throwing money. They're throwing money in it. And it seems like it's a frenzy because they're so motivated by this, you remember the Jerry Lewis telethon? Okay. There was, when it got going at 3 a.m, did you ever stay up to watch that late? It was like, there was something there. And it's like, we're all caught up in that spirit. Okay. So we're, in a way we gotta come.
Well, just say one thing, which is that I joked before about Moshe would lose his job in the development department, but we think about Jerry Lewis, and I never did watch that, but let's assume he did a lot of good work. I also just been watching this show about this fraud named what was her name? The show's called Inventing Anna. It's been a Netflix show about, this is a real life story about a kind of an insane young woman who like talked her way into like high fashion and really rich people, and she defrauded people for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and she was going to build up this big private club, but it was all a sham, and she just defrauded tons of people. That insatiable need for more money, and maybe my joke notwithstanding, Moshe actually gets huge props for saying, we've got a plan, we need this, but we need this and only this, and we don't get all what was the name of that preacher, Tammy Faye and Jim Baker? It's like it just became about the money. It has to be more money. And Moshe is not about the money; it's about the Mishkan.
Absolutely.
And once we got the Mishkan, we don't need more money.
So it's reined in. It's saying that there's an impulse here that's out of control. We're gonna put the boundary here. We're gonna put the guardrail for against your own inclinations, which can go out of. You can go wild too on this. Anyway,
and if anybody from Anshe Chesed is listening, we still need some help for the Rav Chesed.
There you go. But okay, and if you want to support Camp Ramah, or you want to support any of her shuls, or Solomon Schechter, please do so. All right. Well, we need to put the boundary and the bow on this. It's Shabbat Shkalim. We didn't really talk about Shabbat Shkalim, a separate parsha that begins the 4 special parshiyot. Can you believe it? This is, I think, our anniversary. Shabbat, it's our anniversary.
Very close.
Very close. Well, it's been great so far, and we continue. And we're gonna leave it here for now. So Shabbat Shalom from us here, and we'll see you next week on the next edition of Parasha Talk.